Right now, there is something between you and the sky. You probably haven't looked at it today. You might not know what it's made of. Plaster, maybe. Concrete. Timber you have never seen and never will. It is the single most important object in your life, and you have never once thought about it. But for almost the whole time humans have existed, there was nothing up there. No roof. No wall. No door to close. And a naked human lying on open ground at night does not have a comfort problem. It has a problem measured in hours. So everybody wants the same thing from a story like this. Show me the first ever house. I have to be straight with you before we start. Nobody can show you that. What we have instead is stranger and better. There is a place I want to take you later. A frozen plain, 18,000 years ago, with no cave to crawl into and not one tree to cut down. The people living there still put a roof over their heads. They made it out of the animals they had eaten. So, how did humans invent shelter? And, fair warning, the answer is not the cave. The cave is where this story sits, still for 1,000,000 years. I already did the digging, so let me properly tell you the story. Take your clothes off, and this room becomes a survival problem. That sounds like an exaggeration. It is not. A naked adult sitting still is thermally comfortable somewhere around 28 to 32 degrees Celsius, 82 to 90 Fahrenheit. Not 20, not 22. Room temperature is already dangerously cold for us, and we have simply agreed not to mention it. Below that line, your body stops coasting and starts spending, burning fuel to hold 37 degrees in your chest. Naked at freezing, hypothermia begins inside the hour. Not overnight. Inside the hour, we lost our fur deep in the past. But the genetic clock for fitted clothing, read from the lice that live in clothing, only reaches back a couple of 100,000 years, which leaves an enormous gap. No fur. No clothes either. Nothing between us and the cold but fire, and something to block the wind. So here is what every building on this planet has in common, from a hide tent to a glass tower in Dubai. Every building you have ever been inside is a machine for pretending you are still in Africa. That is completely all it does. Everything else, the plumbing, the paint, the mortgage, is decoration on top of that one job. But the first ever shelter was not a building. It was a hole in a rock that nobody made. Wonderwerk Cave, in the northern Cape of South Africa. Something has been walking into it for close to 2 million years. In 2012, Francesco Berna and his colleagues found burned bone and the ash of burned plants deep in the intact sediment. Fire inside that cave, roughly 1,000,000 years ago, 30 meters in from the mouth, too far for a wildfire to have blown through. 30 meters. Somebody carried fire the length of a swimming pool into the dark and kept it alive there. But notice what the cave is not doing. Nobody made it. It is not architecture. It is real estate. And here is the trap in the evidence. Caves keep things. They trap sediment. They shelter hearths and bone from the rain. Open ground loses everything. So our ancestors look like cave dwellers, partly because caves are the only part that properly survived. We are not reading a history of shelter. We are reading a history of what didn't rot. For most of this story, shelter was something you were lucky enough to find. And luck does not scale. Kalambo Falls, northern Zambia. In 2019, a team led by Larry Barham of Liverpool lifted 2 logs out of waterlogged mud. They lay across each other, and they were joined. One had a notch cut into it, deliberately, with stone tools, so the other would seat down into it. Luminescence dating put them at 476,000 years old. Sit with that. It is older than our species. Homo sapiens turns up around 300,000 years ago. Somebody who was not quite us made a joint. So, the first ever building. Except no. Barham's team does not call it a house. They think it was most likely a platform or a walkway on a floodplain. It might be the oldest joinery on Earth and still not be a wall. So the first thing we can properly point to was not a house. It was a wall against the wind, and possibly not even that. Then the trail goes completely cold. 465,000 years of nothing. Not because nobody built anything in all that time. Because wood rots, and the record is only as good as the mud it fell into. One exception is worth stopping for. Brunicle Cave, in France, 176,000 years ago. Neanderthals snapped stalagmites off the cave floor and arranged them into two rings. The larger one, nearly 7 meters across, deep inside, in total darkness. Nobody argues about whether that was on purpose. They were properly shaping enclosed space underground before we ever showed up. But a windbreak only blocks. To make a shelter hold heat, you have to put something inside it. Qesem Cave, Israel, about 300,000 years ago. Ruth Shahak Gross, at the Weizmann Institute, found a thick bed of wood ash pressed into the sediment. The important part is not that it burned. It is where. The same spot. Over and over. Dead center of the cave. And around it, the work was sorted butchery in one zone, tool making in another. Shahak Gross describes the moment fire became two things at once. A way to cook, and a place to gather. Think about that for a second. A hearth used again and again in one position gives a space a center. And the moment a space has a center, it has an inside, which completely inverts what a wall is for. Until now, a wall stops something coming in. From here, a wall stops something getting out. A roof is not there to keep the weather out. It is there to keep the heat in. Every ceiling is a lid. That might be the first ever room. Not because somebody built walls, but because somebody put a fire in the middle and never moved it. And notice where it is sitting. In the middle of the room. Remember that. Now, all of this works properly, as long as your landscape hands you something to build with. Some landscapes hand you nothing. From here, the story follows cause, not the calendar. These people came later than the cave and the notch. What they did was harder. 1965. Mezhyrek, Central Ukraine. A farmer is widening his cellar, 2 meters down, and his spade stops against something solid. It is the lower jaw of a mammoth. He has just put a shovel through an 18,000-year-old house. Understand the place first, because the place explains everything. This is the mammoth steppe at the peak of the last ice age. Dwarf birch, grass, sedge, almost no trees, no cobbles. Winter air at -30, -40. A landscape dangerously determined to kill you, which has also removed every material you might use to stop it. So look at what they built anyway. The foundation is a ring of mammoth skulls, each one set with the forehead facing inward. Pelvises and long bones driven vertically into the ground to hold the line. Above that, more skulls, then shoulder blades laid in courses, then long bones and lengths of spine. Lower jaws interlocked through the wall in a herringbone, tooth into socket, like brickwork. Tusks arching the entrance. Hides stretched over all of it. One structure, around 385 bones, on a floor 4 to 5 meters across. Beneath that floor, 4,600 worked artifacts and a pit full of ash. Perhaps 20 tons of bone and earth, standing in the shape of a beehive. 20 tons, moved without a wheel, a pulley, or a single draft animal. And they burned the bones, too. Spongy bone, loaded with marrow fat, wicks like a candle and burns long and hot. The house and the fuel came off the same animal. This is the first ever house that had to be hunted. In 2025, Wei Chu in Leiden and Pavlo Shidlovsky in Kiev redated the largest structure to about 18,000 years ago. And honestly, the method is my favorite part of this whole story. They ignored the mammoth bones completely and carbon-dated fox, hare, and wolf instead, because the mammoth bones had mostly been scavenged from carcasses already lying out on the plain. The mammoths were lying about the age of the house. Then there is Kostenki Ukstoista, on the Don River in Russia, a bone circle 12.5 meters across. Walls of piled bone up to 2 meters thick, 2,982 bones, from at least 64 mammoths. And no entrance that anyone has been able to find. Alexander Pryor's team, who published it, doubt it was a home at all. Too little daily debris for a base camp, and a 12-meter span is very hard to roof. A house, a larder, or a monument. The specialists genuinely do not agree, and I am not going to pretend for you that they do. But whatever it was, somebody carried nearly 3,000 mammoth bones across a frozen plain by hand. They had no wood and no cave, so they took apart the animal they were eating and rebuilt it as a house. And then they did the other thing, the thing the animal could not give them. They cut the floor into the earth. At Udinovo, at Timanovka, at Kostenki, floors sit 0.5 meter to a meter below the surface, dug down into frozen loess, which does two jobs at once. less wall, standing up in the wind, and the floor is now touching something that does not care what month it is. Here is the physics, and it is the whole trick. Below about a meter, the ground stops following the day. By 2 or 3 meters, it settles near the average temperature of the entire year. On that step, the subsoil held close to zero, while the air above it ran at -35. So digging down bought them a floor 30 degrees warmer than the sky. No fuel, no invention, just depth. At Gonsi, in Ukraine, the pits ringing the huts were doing 3 separate jobs. They were quarries. You dug the loess out and packed it against the walls to seal them. They were larders. Food went in and sat on the permafrost at the bottom of the pit. And they were stores for spare bone. A freezer, an insulation quarry, and a woodshed. Except the wood was bone. Think about what that means for you, tonight, in a heated room. The ground was never a last resort. It is the best insulation on this planet. It works everywhere, and it costs nothing. We stopped using it because we found something cheaper. Not because we found something better. The warmest thing on that plane was not the fire. It was completely and unglamorously the dirt. It is the middle of the night, and you are lying on a raised bench of snow, under fur, listening to a wind that would kill you in 20 minutes if it could reach you. It cannot. There is a wall between you and it, and that wall is made of the wind's own weather. Because here is the move nobody expects. Every step so far holds the cold off with a barrier. The igloo builds the barrier out of the cold, and the usual version oversells it. Packed snow conducts heat at roughly the same rate as dry wood. Snow is not a miracle material. The difference is that on a frozen coast, there is no wood, and the snow is already lying there, unlimited and free. Outside, -40. Inside, where people sleep, above freezing. The heat comes from about 100 watts per person, and a quillic, a soapstone lamp burning seal oil. The lamp's warmth melts a skin off the inner wall, which refreezes glassy and seals every gap. The house properly repairs itself while you sleep in it. But the real design is in the floor. 3 levels. A sunken entrance tunnel below the floor, the living floor above it, a raised sleeping bench above that. Cold air is heavy, so it rolls down into the tunnel and stays there. The warmest air collects exactly where the people are. No technology. No moving parts. Nothing to break. Just somebody working out, completely without instruments, which way air goes. Worth saying clearly, igloo just means house. The snow house is an iglooviak, and it was seasonal, a winter hunting shelter. Plenty of Arctic peoples built in sod and whalebone instead. Shelter is not always a fight with the landscape. Sometimes it is a deal. Bone, snow, earth, all of it taken. The next step was to stop taking and start manufacturing. Sun-dried mudbrick appears in the Levant and Anatolia around 9,500 years BC. Mud, a mold, and the sun. Which means the shape of your house is no longer dictated by what the ground hands you. You can decide. At Çatalhöyük, from about 7100 BC, thousands of people lived in mudbrick houses packed wall to wall with no streets at all. Known. Not one alley in a settlement of thousands. You came in through a hole in the roof. Down a ladder. The rooftops were the streets, and the dead were buried under the floor you slept on, and the hearth sat directly beneath those roof openings. So the door and the chimney were the same hole. For 9,000 years, the way people got out and the way the smoke got out were one opening in the ceiling. That one hole is the entire problem. A fire in the middle of the floor needs a high open ceiling to let the smoke go and to keep sparks off the thatch. So most of your heat rises straight past you and leaves. And you cannot put a floor anyone can live on above an open fire. One fire. One warm room. Everybody in it. In a medieval hall, that meant the lord, the servants, the guests, and the children all sleeping in the same space. Not out of affection. It was the only warm room that existed. It was also, quietly, making them ill. Skeletons from medieval sites carry rib damage and chronic sinus infection from a lifetime of breathing wood smoke indoors. That cozy hall everyone pictures was dangerously bad air, all winter, every winter. Then the flu arrives. Masonry chimneys turn up in Norman castles in the 11th and 12th centuries, and the royal accounts catch it happening. A chimney, repaired at Windsor in 1237. By the 14th century, houses in Bruges, Paris, and London have fireplaces in individual rooms. Now the smoke goes sideways into a wall. So you can put a ceiling in, then a second story, then a room with a door. And in 1971, the historian Leroy Dresbeck worked out what that actually did. Moving the fire into the wall cut the number of people who could sit at it by roughly 3/4, which completely drained the purpose out of a large room. Rooms got smaller. Ceilings got lower. Heat spread more evenly. His conclusion was 6 words long. The chimney fostered the small room. This is the first ever room a person could close a door on and still be warm. And that is a bigger event in your life than it was in his. Somebody noticed at the time, too. In the 1370s, William Langland was already complaining about it. The lord and lady no longer care to sit in the hall. Now, the rich man eats by himself, in a private parlor or in a chamber with a chimney, and the great hall stands empty. 2 centuries after the technology arrives, a poet is mourning the room we lost. Not everyone accepts that order, and it matters. Witold Rybczynski argues the reverse, that the wish for privacy came first, out of a change in how people thought about themselves, and only then demanded a fire in every room. But whether the chimney created the wish or finally granted it, the outcome is not in dispute. The room where everyone had to sit together stopped existing. And ironically, the thing we built to gather around is the thing that scattered us. The chimney was not invented to get rid of the smoke. It was invented to get rid of each other. 800 years later, we did it again. This time we threw the design away completely. July the 17th, 1902. Willis Carrier, 25 years old and 1 year out of Cornell, finishes a set of drawings for the first ever modern air conditioning system. It was not for people. It was for a printing plant in Brooklyn, where summer humidity was swelling the paper so the colors came out misaligned. He built a machine to control the moisture. Cooling was a side effect. And that is ironically the largest fact in this video. The machine that lets 8 billion people ignore the climate they live in was built to stop ink from smudging. Then the architecture quietly gave up. In 1969, Rayner Banham laid out what happened. Once power got cheap, nobody needed the old tricks anymore. The thick wall that holds last night's cool until noon. The overhanging roof that eats the summer sun and lets the winter one in. All optional. You can just buy a box and plug it in. For 400,000 years, a shelter was a machine that worked without being switched on. Yours is not. Cut the power in August, and your house becomes a greenhouse with your furniture in it. Except in one town. Coober Pedy, South Australia, where the surface hits 48 degrees and more than half the town lives in dugouts cut into the hills. 3 meters down, it holds 23 degrees all year, with no air conditioning at all. And the men who started digging them, around 1915, were soldiers home from the First World War. They had learned to live underground in the trenches, and they brought the habit to the desert. So here is where we end up. Given a climate that will properly kill you, modern people with modern tools reinvented the pit dwelling. 18,000 years later. Same answer. So, how did humans invent shelter? Not in one moment. In a climb. And every step is a bigger idea than the one beneath it. You take what you find, then you cut a notch, and make a thing that was not there. Then you carry fire inside, and a wall stops being armor and becomes a lid. Then you walk onto a plane that offers you nothing, and build a house out of the animal you are eating. Then you dig down and steal the heat out of the ground. Then you learn to manufacture stone, and the landscape stops telling you what shape to be. Then you move the fire into the wall and buy yourself a door. And then you plug it all in and forget every step above. Look at what that bought. A furless tropical primate now lives on essentially every land surface on this planet, including places that would kill an unsheltered human before morning. 8 billion of us. That is not a small thing, and I am not going to be sniffy about it. Now look at what it cost. For almost the whole of human existence, a home was one room with one fire, and everybody slept in it. Not because they were close, because it was the only warm place there was. You could not be alone. You gained a door. You lost the fire, everyone had to share. The fire sat in the middle of the room from Qesem Cave to the Middle Ages. 300,000 years in the same position. It moved into the wall about 800 years ago, and nobody in your house has noticed it is gone. So the first ever house. You wanted one, And I told you at the start that nobody could hand it to you. This is why there was never a first one. There was a hole in a rock, a notch in a log, a fire that stayed put, a wall made of jawbones, a floor cut into frozen dirt. Every one of them the first ever something. Not one of them the first ever house. The house is not an invention. It is a habit we have been correcting for 500,000 years. Tonight you will go home, and you will close a door behind you. That door is the newest part of the oldest thing humans do. The roof over you is older than farming, older than language, probably. It may be older than our species. But the wall between you and the people you live with is younger than the telescope. Your own room is younger than Shakespeare. Somebody dragged a branch across the wind. Somebody carried the fire inside. Somebody built a roof out of bones, because there was nothing else left. And somebody, much later, moved the fire into the wall so they could finally be alone. Honestly, that last one is the part I can't put down. We spent 400,000 years learning how to keep each other warm. And the moment we got properly good at it, the first thing we did with the skill was buy some privacy. That is all a house is. A pocket of the tropics carried a very long way north with a door on it now.